Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Climbing Business Journal podcast. I'm John Bergman. I'm the senior editor at CBJ, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And I'll start by just giving a brief overview of what we plan to do with these podcasts, because it's a pretty simple objective. We hope to inform and connect and inspire people who work in the climbing industry. And we aim to do that with in-depth conversations. So to jumpstart things, today's episode is an interview with Garrett Gregor. It's almost hard to label Garrett because he has done so much. He's been a coach at Team ABC. He's been a route setter for gyms and for international competitions. He was one of the setters at the Tokyo Olympics. And so he's just kind of become this wealth of experience and wisdom as it pertains to not only the evolution of route setting, but also just the evolution of the climbing industry. So we get into all of that in this episode. We talk about the increase in professionalization that Garrett has noticed and some strides that maybe still need to be made in the industry. If you're a comp fan, pay close attention to our little conversational deviation into what makes competitors like Colin Duffy and Natalia Grossman and Brooke Rabatou so great and so elite. But before we roll into the conversation, let me shout out some brands that are helping to keep this podcast running. First up, thanks to EP Climbing. Over the past 30 plus years, EP has built climbing walls for gyms, for schools, for outdoor parks, for the Olympics. So go check them out at epclimbing.com. Secondly, thanks to Kilter. For about 10 years now, Kilter has been producing some of the most popular and iconic climbing shapes. And Kilter's actually won more CBJ Grip List awards than any other brand ever, which is a really impressive accolade. So go check out the full selection of shapes at Kilter's website, which is settercloset.com. Okay, that is enough with the preamble. On to the interview. Here it is, my chat with Garrett Gregor. What I find noteworthy about your career, I think this is a good starting point, is it's not just that you have gone from being a setter at one gym to being a setter at another gym. It's that the moves of your career have been really historic plot points for the whole climbing industry. First, you were at the ground level for Team ABC, which was pretty pioneering, giving an exclusive focus to kids, to route setting for kids, to being a facility for kids. You also set at the Tokyo Olympics, which was, of course, historic because it was climbing's Olympic debut. You've also set at various commercial gyms. You were with Bouldering Project for a bit, which has gyms spread across the country. So when you reflect on all of it, does it feel like you've been working on the route setting craft for a long time, or does it feel still pretty new to you?
Great question. First of all, congratulations to you, because I think too that this podcast represents kind of like a shift of where we are in the industry. There's so many people that are interested to know about this and the craft of route setting and where we're going next as an industry. And, and as much as we've grown, there's still so much more we've yet to do as a sport, as a profession. And I think, as much as I've done, I think there's still more to do. So I'm flattered about the analogy between my resume and the way the industry's gone. But yeah, I think in some ways it does feel like I've done this for a long time. I won't say that it's been like easy. It's taken a lot of determination, but also sort of like a perseverance in the face of like ambiguity about, was this even going to be possible? When I started setting, it was literally just a volunteer position at my local gym. and something that you did every 6 months or so when the owner of the gym felt like changing the routes over. There was no head route setter. There was certainly no director of setting. There were no route setters. It was just like people that came into the gym that were excited to put that thing up and like sort of challenge themselves and challenge the rest of their community. And so that was 20 something years ago when I look back on it, really, because, it was in 2005, I want to say 2006 that I got my first level one. So, and I had started like I said, volunteering sometime in 2002 or so. So it was like, it has not been like you take this step and then this happens. And then you take this step and then that happens. And there were many nights of like, is this the right move? Like I was sleeping on a floor. I was living on a couch. I was volunteering my time. And that was, that took a lot of sort of resilience to get to where I was. But I knew that was what I wanted to do. I knew that I was so passionate about the craft of route setting, about climbing in general, about sharing that experience, that there was no doubt in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. So in the thick of it, it was not feeling like, oh, I'm just kind of trudging along and like, this is what it was. Everything I wanted to be and everything I breathed was climbing and route setting and thinking about climbing. And looking back on it, I'm like, man, that was 20 years. So I guess, like I said, I think there's still more to go, but it was not an easy path to take.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the when you say there's more to go, I'd be curious to hear some ideas or some hopes and dreams that you have of where it will continue to go, because you mentioned starting off as a volunteer and the schedule for your setting being pretty intermittent. And now, of course, after a decade, 20 years, the pay is better in route setting. Obviously, there's the delineation of roles, and there are those head setters at pretty much every gym. So I think to that point, the professionalization of route setting has become better. And that's a bell that we've kind of heard ringing for the past several years as route setting is becoming more professionalized. I think that is certainly true. And all the things we just said are strides that have been made in a positive direction. But I sometimes still wonder if the professionalization of the route setting industry is a little exaggerated or oversold, maybe. It's almost like we want to say it's professionalized, when in fact, I think there is still a lot of room for improvement to make it a lifelong career. I mean, I don't see a lot of route setters, for example, sustaining a family on a route setting salary. I don't see a lot of people saving money on a route setting, at least my friends that are route setters. I don't see them saving a lot of money. I don't see them putting down money for a house in a lot of cases. I see some setters getting health insurance, which is wonderful that some gyms do that, but there are plenty of other gyms that don't do that. And I'm not saying that to be a knock on those gyms. These are just kind of like observations. And even beyond all this, I don't see a lot of people setting into their mid 40s, 50s and beyond. And God bless those people that do. I think it's awesome, but I think it's pretty rare. All those things that are kind of hallmarks of professionalization in other industries, I don't really see that in mass in climbing yet. And so I'm wondering if you'd gnaw on that a little bit with me, because this is something that it's kind of a topic that I think about a lot.
Yeah, I don't think you're the only one. I think a lot of people are looking at the industry, the profession of route setting, and thinking about, how can we make this better? It's hard because I think there's a couple of things going on there. I think one, there's like sort of this cultural reckoning with like what is work, how much of that should be allocated to serving for a business and serving for others. So there's like this kind of like in the zeitgeist of what's going on right now, there's like, how much of that are we really willing to give. So I think that's one thing. And then kind of like interwoven with that, there's like a lot of professions that pay really, really well. And you look at what it takes to not just route set, but to deliver mail, to be a garbage worker, to to lay brick, to like, there's all of these professions where I think people are looking around and saying like, well, why is that valued so much more than mine? Or, again, I can't sort of like speak to all of the things going on there or how to best come up with a solution there, but I think that's something that's going on. And I think that happens within route setting in particular, because route setters see how successful we have a sport now that has been sort of like taken on en masse in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people that are getting into the sport now. And I think route setters are trying to keep up with that and feeling as though they're the ones that are helping to promote the sport, that are helping to get people into the sport, that are helping to get people enjoying the sport, and feeling like their contribution isn't quite meeting the same arc that people are getting into the sport. So I think there's that. Then I think there's also some truth to the fact that, as you said, we have made strides in where we are. Like I said, it was literally a part of the path that you like volunteered, didn't get paid, had to pay your own way to get there. You had to have the privilege of sort of like either having someone support you or being well off enough to make that happen. And fortunately, for USA Climbing, that is no longer part of the path. For a lot of gym organizers, that's no longer part of the path. But for a lot of federations, that's also embedded into the culture of how you do this. You don't say no to opportunities. You are beholden to sort of when this thing arises. You can't say no. You have to give what it takes. You have to put in more hours because more hours makes a better product. And that's a hard thing to like tease out, I think. You can't just remove it all at once. It has to sort of like happen over time, sadly, I think. But I think a third place is that we haven't quite gotten to a point, or maybe because of what's happening in that culture of like, you need to do more, you need to take on all the opportunities you can. And people are so passionate about climbing generally that get into this craft, that they just want to do it all the time, that there's a hard work-life balance, either because of the work that's demanded of them or because of their passion for it. And that's something, somebody laying tile isn't going to lay tile on the weekends just for fun because they love doing it. Or maybe they'll do that occasionally on their house, but like you kind of see what I'm getting at, that like, I think there has to be a way that we either supplement with the industry. So those people 50, 60 years old that have been able to make it a career aren't having to take falls from 15 feet onto foam every day. That there's a good balance between how they can allow their bodies to recover, but also fill the needs of what their community is asking for. So there has to be maybe a little bit of like a give and take with what the community's expectations are of route setters and the turnover that happens in the gym. There's a lot of things to tease out. And I don't know that I have like the answer of what needs to happen next, but I think you're right that those are some of the areas that we need to move towards. That, if we are to say like the craft has truly become professionalized, then I think we aspire to want to be able to have people do this into their 50s, 60s, to be able to retire on it, and to be able to say like they can afford a house, they can afford a family, or maybe it's, the sad reality is that it's not a profession like that. I don't know the answer necessarily, but I hope we can get to a point where people can continue doing it for a long time. And maybe they supplement with forerunners that come into the gym. Maybe they supplement with the there's limits on what their body can do in terms of how many days a week they work, or there's ways they can supplement with coaching for their community within the gym, which is something I think a lot of gyms and a lot of people that are getting into the sport want. You go to a tennis club, you go to a golf course, there's so many golf pros and tennis pros that are, you can pick a private lesson anytime, but that's not the case so much in climbing right now.
I wondered if we're going to see more of that in the future, more private coaching. It gets to be kind of a complicated area because a lot of gyms, from what I've understood from talking to people that do coach and then to talking to gym owners and whatnot, a lot of gyms don't want people coaching in that gym unless they are associated with the gym or employed by the gym, which to your point is similar to tennis clubs and golf clubs usually. But I do know that is a growing part of climbing, is this idea of a personal. I mean, as much as climbing is now promoted so much as like a functional fitness sport, a sort of like yoga, right? And so you're going to see people coming into it with those ambitions of wanting to have it be their workout instead of doing yoga or something like that. And so they're going to want somebody training them or leading them. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in the next decade, the idea of personal trainers in climbing, because I've certainly seen a lot emerge just in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that want that. I'd say, to your point, that are looking to like be shown the ropes, no pun intended. When you walk into the gym, it can be really intimidating. And so that's one way to sort of like get into this sport. And a lot of people want that, and it's just not offered everywhere. Or if it is, as you said, they need to be working for the gym. And I think in a lot of other countries too, that there's not like a strict, you have to be setting only at this gym, or you have to be coaching only at this gym. That's another cultural thing too, and a product of sort of our working environments, and maybe cuts down on that competition a little bit for how people get into it. But I do think the profession of coaching is one that is a logical progression for route setters that know the product so well and so intimately, and can be able to articulate, for some that have those skills as well, to be able to communicate with others and share what it is that they need to do. That is a logical next step for them, and could be some way to sort of balance those two things.
And you do have a lot of coaching experience, training experience. We'll get to that in a sec, but I want to stay on the route setting here. Aside from the professionalization of the industry that we've talked about, let's talk about the actual the craft of setting. In your career, all the places you've been, the years that you've been at it, what have been some of the biggest changes that you have noticed?
Well, one would just be sort of the resources you have to work with. The walls that are constructed are vastly different. Where I grew up climbing, it was like concrete plastered onto walls. And so not having that, having flat wood panels that you can put a variety of different shapes and sizes onto, makes for a very different setting environment, and something that you can, the bounds and the confinements and the constraints of what you were limited to before changed dramatically. And to that point, the holds that have been shaped, if you look back, when people were just getting into the sport and sort of like breaking off real rocks and sort of bolting those onto the sides of underpasses, to where we were with initial urethane or resin holds, to what we can do now with polyurethane and hollow backed holds, these massive shapes that can go onto the wall that are lighter and stronger. They're more colorful, so they draw people in. Those are really big changes. And then I'd say sort of like fiberglass and, wooden volumes are another element of that, which is wooden volumes didn't, I think, really come into the sort of normal vocabulary of setters until probably the early 2000s, late 2000s maybe. And at that point, it was like, whoa, you can totally change the angles on these things. You can create these stalactite features, and it creates this whole other dimension, literally, that you can work within as a setter. And that and those big fiberglass shapes that sort of like have a very different texture to them are some of the ways that the sport has changed pretty dramatically. Otherwise, I'd say the tools that we have to work with as well. When I started, it was you picked up a T-wrench and you got tendonitis pretty much immediately. And then we got to impacts or drills, and then to impacts drivers. And then now we have soft impacts that limit the vibration and limit, the amount of like decibels that you have to experience as a setter doing this day to day. What else? Like there's all sorts of tools. When I started setting on a rope, looking back, it was really horrible what we did. But you kind of like made it work, and you like tied into a T-nut at the bottom of the wall, and you just went for it, and you pulled up on a gree-gree, which isn't meant to be used that way. And now we have rigs and safety harnesses. And I think there's been a lot of strides made into that professionalization, because what can happen there is very dangerous, from people dropping holds onto other setters, to people dropping holds onto members, to themselves getting hurt pretty seriously. You get up into the air 20, 30, 40 plus feet, and that's really dangerous territory. So that's one area that I'm really glad to see, that we have some sort of standardization around what we do and the tools that we use.
You mentioned the massive the volumes, the massive holds. Related to all of that, the larger surface of those big holds allows for bigger moves in a lot of ways. You can land on a bigger surface, which kind of ushers in this era of whatever you want to call it, parkour style setting, more dynamic style of setting, comp style of setting. And you have set for comps and also commercial gyms. And so I'm sure you have heard this pushback from people. In a lot of times it's from people that have been climbing for a long time, but in some cases it's just even newer climbers. They push back against this comp style, this really dynamic style of setting that has become pretty prevalent, obviously in competitions, as the name suggests, but also more and more in commercial gyms. So as a setter who has worked in all styles of setting, what do you say to people that push back against that or criticize the comp style of setting, so to speak?
That's a good question. And, you saying that, I think, jogged in my mind one other really big part of, I think, what has changed. And it's not necessarily a physical tool per se, but it's kind of the community of route setters that has changed. It used to be that you got your information from magazines and little snippets on Dead Point that came out every now and then. I'm probably dating myself because many of the climbers don't know Dead Point. It's what Mellow is maybe now today. Now you have like just a flood of Instagram and people seeing what others did, and you getting to see what this person climbed on, and that person getting to see what happened in this comp, and this person seeing what so-and-so is climbing outside. And I think that breeds, along with the sort of route setting program that we have, particularly in the United States, the USA climbing program, for all the things, I think, as I mentioned before, the ways that it had yet to professionalize, and we volunteered, and et cetera, et cetera. The community that has built, and the people that see this as a career and as a profession and take these things seriously and get to share with one another, share their ideas, share their experiences, learn from one another, has really, I think, up-leveled what the craft of route setting is and can be. So I'd say that's another big component of that. And to that point, there's always this push in route setting to try new things and to, see what else you can put on. When people first put wooden volumes on the wall, it was like, what is that thing? And I think fundamentally, a lot of people don't love new things. And that's fair. Some people want to go out and just ski on blues all day. Some people want to go out and just hit the ball around. That's totally fine. And I think as a gym, you need to try to provide for all of that, but also try to push what people have available to them. Because if it's just one distinct style of setting, I think that's a disservice to everyone. But if you weave in and, maybe you don't like the smeary slabs that are comp style, but you get to do it every now and then, and it's not just like forced down your throat every single set, every single week, then maybe you learn to enjoy that. And I think that's another area that coaching in particular can offer to our communities, is that helping them to see. This is one of the things that in coaching I used to have them really try to embrace, is that, sometimes like what you don't enjoy is what you need most. And sometimes suffering through it a little bit is really valuable to you as a climber, but also to you personally in helping you grow and realize, you're capable of more than you thought you were. And I think if we're able to complement people's climbing experience with coaches and people that help others see that, maybe it's not a V5, or maybe it's not, what that number that you thought it was, but it's still a climb that's going to be valuable for you. I think that's one way we can really add to people's climbing experience.
Let's talk more about your coaching, because it's not fair to just say you have coached. You have coached, more accurately, some of the best climbers in American history. I'm at Team ABC in particular. I'm thinking of Natalia Grossman, Brooke Rabatou, Colin Duffy, Margot Hayes. That is not an exhaustive list. There are many others. When you look, though, at the elite of the elite that you have coached from the time that they were really young and part of the Team ABC system, is there a single quality that all of them share? Is there a single aspect to the elite climbers of the world that you kind of notice in all of them that maybe you don't notice, or you don't notice to the same degree in most other climbers? Yeah.
There is. And this is part of what I think, when we talked about the path for me as a route setter, right? It was not like an easy one-way street that you made this turn, you made that turn. It was not clear what you did, but all along the way, persistence, dedication, resilience, those are the qualities that I think makes people good at what they do. And that is something you see in all of those individuals. I think back to like seeing Colin in the gym, even from a young age, and the sort of like intensity that he wanted to do well at this thing. It was evident from early on at like 7 years old. Everybody could see it. You could feel it. And I think that exists, and in some degree in all of those individuals that you named. And it's more prevalent than it is, I think, in the general population. And it comes from, I think for every individual, it comes from a variety of different places. I think that resilience, persistence, intensity is one bucket, and another bucket is adaptability. You see this in high level athletes across the board. I think I'm a fan of all sports and watching athletes that perform at high levels, and you see something pretty consistent that, like, this might be polarizing, but if LeBron James does not adapt the way he plays over the course of his 20-something years in the NBA, then he's not going to be able to succeed. If Rafael Nadal, if Sabalenka does not work on her serve, then, she's going to fall short. And you see people adapt and identify the things that they need to work on. And this is what I mean about people that don't enjoy competition climbing, that you have to be willing to adapt in order to get better. You have to be willing to embrace the things that you're not good at in order to progress. And again, some people don't want to progress. So or some people don't have that sort of intense desire to progress, I'd say. But, for those that do, that's one of the qualities I think that can really elevate you.
A lot of the things that you said, resilience, adaptability, intensity, those seem to me like innate things in large part, especially if you're talking about a kid who's 7 years old, right? There has to be something there. It's nature and nurture, right? That kid was born with a certain degree of intensity or persistence that maybe other kids don't have. But I wonder if, and I'd enjoy hearing from you, can some of those factors be sort of coached into kids, I guess? And what would be the strategies for that? If you're wanting to make a climber more adaptable, or you're wanting to make them more resilient, what would you do with that kid to improve those things?
Well, I think as a coach, your job is to recognize what people's desires are. Not everybody wants to be Colin Duffy. Not everybody wants to be dedicating, because it takes a lot of time and energy to do what they do. It is not something that comes easy. It's not something that comes overnight. Progress is not linear, and there's going to be setbacks along the way. You're going to be unsure whether this is the right path. And so from like a coach or a parent's perspective, you can't force that down anyone. Like I can't make someone Colin Duffy that doesn't want to be Colin Duffy. And so in that sense, like that sort of intrinsic motivation, nature, if you want to call it, that intrinsic motivation is always going to be more powerful than any extrinsic rewards that I offer up. And, for anybody that's coached or I haven't parented, but, bribing someone to do something is not going to make them love it long term. It's not going to encourage them to want to do it on their own. So I think you have to be careful and recognize that that path is not for everyone. And for those that do, one, putting them in sort of the right environment. One of the things that was really unique and special about ABC was partially coincidence, partially location, partially sort of the talent of coaches and route setters that we had in the gym. All those factors coming together at the right time, and the kids fed off of that and fed off of each other. And so one, it's putting them in the right environment that, a kid can progress, an individual can progress to a certain level, maybe on their own or with their parents or just with a couple of friends at the gym. But one of the things that made ABC special is that there's so many of those kids that wanted to be Colin Duffys. There's so many of those kids that help push and elevate each other. Again, this is another thing that you hear in high level sports is, I really enjoyed playing so-and-so because he helped elevate. Like, I feel like I played better with him, or I really enjoyed playing this team because that sort of the competition is fierce and you can feel it. And it brought me to a whole other level. So the environment in which those people come to like mature and come to experience that sport is really important. And people don't like hearing that there's not like a silver bullet that you can just give somebody, but it's true that there's not like any one thing that makes an individual great. It's a lot of things.
And we're talking about Team ABC, founded in Boulder, Colorado by Robin and Didier Rabitou. When you were working at Team ABC, what was the biggest thing that you learned from Robin Erbesfield as a boss, as a mentor?
Robin has that intensity. That's for sure. I don't know if you've ever spent time with Robin, but she possesses that. And if there's anything that you can give kids as coaches, as parents, it's that intensity in the form that like they know that you care so much about what they care about. So maybe that is the silver bullet. And that's something that I learned from Robin. And you see, like, if you went with Robin to a competition, you see it and you can feel it, that she really cares about how those kids do, and what those kids want to do. And yeah, just has so much like love for each and every one of them, especially her kids. And I think that's why you see Sean and Brooke as successful as they are.
Yeah, it's funny you say Robin's intensity and her devotion to the people she coaches, and then we've been talking about Colin Duffy. The first memory for me that comes to mind was being at the Pan Ams a few years ago when I was there when Colin qualified for the Olympics, and I remember standing on the mezzanine next to Robin, being able to experience this fandom that she was like radiating for Colin as she was coaching him, cheering him on. It's one of my favorite memories because it's almost hard to describe this synergy between coach and competitor. It was very evident. It was like this electricity between the two of them. It was really awesome. Really awesome.
Yeah. No, and it's very apparent, right? And like you said, you can kind of feel that energy, and the athletes feel that too.
Related to Colin, let's just keep going here. We'll keep talking about it. Olympian Colin Duffy, Tokyo Olympics. Let's talk about your Olympic memories. You, correct me if I'm wrong, you had kind of a unique entry into the whole Olympic whirl because you got the call to be a route setter because somebody who was originally scheduled to be a route setter, Katja Vidmar, was pregnant and could not go to set at the Olympics. So you got how did that work? Did the IOC or the IFSC just call you up and say, hey, so Katja had a complication. Are you free August of 2020?
Yeah, more or less. That's how it worked. It was actually right at the sort of height of COVID. It was, what would have been December 2019, I think, right before the new year, maybe. And I remember the nominations were expected to come out, but obviously the whole season was in question because nobody knew what was going to be happening with COVID. And this was my second or third year officially as an IFSC route setter. And so I kind of expected the call to come back as like, sorry, you're low man on the totem pole. There's not much we can offer you this year. And instead it was like, hey, Katja is pregnant. Well, actually, he didn't even say that Katja was pregnant at the time. It was Katja she's just unable to set. And my first thought was, oh my God, is she okay? And then it was like, oh yeah, she's okay. Still didn't quite mention what it was, but yeah, she's okay. But we need somebody to set for Tokyo. She can't do it anymore. And you've done all these other events and the crew thinks that you're the best fit. And so are you available? And it was like, oh, let me check my schedule. Yeah, of course. Definitely available. And yeah, it felt sort of like everything that I had been working to those past 20 something years, or I guess at that point, almost 20 years. Yeah, it was really special to be able to do that at a time when it was climbing's first foray into the Olympics. Two of the kids that I used to coach previously, Brooke and Colin, had qualified as two of the four U.S. representatives, which was incredibly special. And then, yeah, to be able to see that in person and witness it, it just felt sort of like a full circle moment.
I don't know if people realize just how incredible it was to have three people so closely tied to Team ABC, meaning Brooke, Colin, and yourself, just so like a part of the Olympics, to say nothing of Robin Erbesfield, who is as Colin's longtime coach there. As it just speaks really volumes for Team ABC and the system that they've put in place, and not only for the competitors, but then for people, you as a setter who was trained there, worked there. I don't know. I feel like Team ABC should have a plaque or something inside their gym. Maybe they do. I have not been there, but they should, for being such a large fraction of the American Tokyo Olympics kind of portion.
Yeah, it's I think in a lot of ways, I think that people underestimate how much these individual clubs give to USA Climbing in general. You look at the competitors that have risen through the ranks. Natalia started off at zero gravity in San Francisco. She moved to Boulder, and I'm forgetting the exact date. I want to say it was 2013, maybe 2014. But, Zero Gravity, Stone Summit, Team Texas, Vertical World, these are teams that, have brought to competition climbing the likes of Drew Ruana, Zach Gala, Xander Waller, Bob Dylan Countryman, there's Quinn Mason. The list goes on and on and on and on. There are, I think, coaches in all of those programs, people in all of those programs that care so much about what those kids and what those people want to accomplish, that it really, I think what we're seeing and sort of like where USA Climbing's team, where the US team has gone these past several years now, we're really seeing the effects of that. And at ABC in particular, we were really fortunate. I'm really grateful to have been a part of it, to have had the opportunity to work with all those individuals, parents, the coaches, the other route setters, the kids, because it was a really special place. And like I said, you don't often have all those things come together at the same time.
Yeah, I'm hoping climbing will continue to be in many, many Olympics, and it will be interesting to see whether there is which gym or which club holds the record for sending the most Olympians over the years. It's going to be a fun statistic.
Yeah.
This is related to USA Climbing and IFSC and the clubs, everything we just talked about. You said in an interview that in setting at the Olympics, you were trying to, and this is kind of a sort of a quote here, package the sport for a new audience and a new era. That's a little bit paraphrased, but that resonated with me. Package the sport for a new audience and a new era. So when we are looking to Olympics in the future, 2024 in Paris being the most obvious one, how would you like to see the packaging of climbing and the packaging of route setting continue to evolve?
Where do I begin? So in Tokyo, at the Olympics, you have such a bigger audience that would maybe never see the sport otherwise. And so the goal is to try to showcase what it is that we do as a sport, our athletes, what our route setters are capable of, and really the focus is more about what the athletes do. But, the whole goal is to make it easily consumable for individuals. And so going into it, it was we're not trying to set the most subtle movement that, you have to be able to appreciate by kind of only seeing the angle of the wall or knowing how bad that foothold was. But we wanted to showcase for individuals, make it very clear where people were going. There were monocolored routes so that it was very obvious where people had to get to on the wall. And to the point about those tension moves, a tension move is very, very cool, but it's also can be hard to understand. And so what's very easy for people to understand is if they're dangling from one finger, okay, that's very easy to understand. If they're dangling from one hand, that's very easy to understand. And so trying to balance those two things between pushing what climbers were capable of, and challenging them with new movement and things that they hadn't seen before. And then at the same time, trying to balance that with, okay, let's sort of give the greatest hits to climbers or to people that have never seen climbing before.
Let's close with, in that same vein, kind of looking at the future, because you've been a part of so many setting teams, you've led setting teams. So I'm wondering if you had to hire let's just call it a dream team of setters in the year 2023, and you're going to set for a gym going forward with this crew, what are you looking for in those candidates?
Oh God, I'm so glad you didn't ask me to pick. That's always the hardest part about, being a chief or helping to organize the event, is trying to pick who you want to be on the team. And sorry, to go back to your other question too, I forgot that you had asked, like, where do you want it to go? So like the goal was to package it as like this thing where, people could understand it better. And I think that's one of the areas that we can really lean into in the future. Our scoring system can still be a little bit complicated to understand. It can still be hard to identify, who's in the lead and what they need to do to win. And so being able to share that with people and to tell the narrative of what's going on and what's at stake for individuals, I think is one of the areas that we can really grow as a sport. And that's, I think, done through format. It's done through what's broadcast. It's done through a lot of different ways. But that's one of the areas that I'm most excited about where we can potentially go. Because I think already for a lot of individuals that it's exciting to just watch people climb. And if we can just elaborate on that a little bit and make it so that, it is more of a competition. It is very clear what Sean needs to do to win, then I think we can really captivate a bigger audience and help elevate athletes and what they can win and do in the sport can really elevate what route setters can achieve in the sport. So I think the more we can get people into it and bought into what it is that we do here and to understand that story, the better it's going to be for everyone. So in terms of picking a route setting team, there's a couple of things that you look for as sort of a chief route setter. One is going to be creativity. Obviously, their ability to sort of think outside the box and see what else is possible. Their attention to detail, being able to know the rules, to know what's possible, what's not possible in terms of the competition format itself. Their empathy to like really understand what athletes go through. A lot of setters, and this is also something that's changed over time to the point earlier of like, what has changed. It used to be that you just went in and set for yourself and put up what you like to climb on. And now it's much more about what do others want to climb on. And for competitions, it's much more about, well, what's going to challenge them, not necessarily what's challenging me, but how well can this route setter empathize with what these individuals, these competitors are going through? Because if they can't understand or even have a semblance of an understanding of like what it means to be in isolation, what it means to feel those nerves, then it makes it harder to do that job. And then lastly, I think there's sort of like an element of people that are fun to be around. That's a hard one to quantify, obviously, because different teams are different. And so when you're like making your selections, you're kind of thinking of, oh, well, how will this individual work with this individual? And how will that person do with so-and-so? But that dynamic can really make or break the week of the competition. If the individuals aren't gelling with one another, then it makes it harder to do the job. And so you want people that are going to motivate each other. You want people that are going to inspire each other and cheer each other on and make the week easier.
I think what might be really encouraging to people is in those qualifications you just listed, nowhere was there a mention of tenure, of long-term experience, saying, I want somebody who has been at this for 10 years or 50, whatever. And you also didn't mention certifications. And that is certainly not to devalue those qualifications. Obviously, those are wonderful if they can complement a candidate's other skills. But that might be nice to hear for people that are new to setting and they maybe don't have a lot of experience or they don't have a lot of certifications. Sounds like in the case of what you just said, like they can still be a viable candidate for being on a setting team. Yeah,
that's, I think an important thing that gets lost often. And obviously like certification, like sure, when you're selecting for, say, a nationals crew, you're limited in the pool of candidates you can select because of the requirements of the competition. You know, when you're selecting for an international competition, you're limited to the pool of individuals that you have, but more broadly, what you're looking for are those things that I was talking about. And I think another important mention is like, you don't have to be the strongest climber. You have to have some level to be able to appreciate the moves, and particularly be able to gauge outside of your understanding of the moves. That's what's really hard. And that's what I was talking about, sort of that empathy. I'm not particularly good at getting my hips up. So I have to really be able to understand, okay, well, you know, it's hard for me, but it's probably not going to be that hard for them, or it might not be that hard for them. So you don't necessarily have to do every single move in order to be a contributor to the team, is I guess what I'm getting at. And I think that gets people down a lot, is, oh, I didn't do this move. And they feel as though they have to perform when they show up. And it's not about that. There's a lot of other things that you do to contribute to the team in any given week. So.
Yeah, this is great stuff. And I feel like every time you and I chat, I feel like we could chat for longer. I hope we can talk again. Is there anything you'd like to plug, or maybe for people that are listening, is there any way they could follow you to stay updated on what you're doing and where you're going?
The one thing that I'd plug for people is like, one of the quotes I like to live by is, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And for me, that's a lot of what drove my ambitions to Routesetting, is like, I was just going to manifest this. And obviously I was fortunate, and I had elements of privilege and all sorts of coincidence that happened. But like, I wanted to make that a thing. I just loved doing that thing. And so, if you really love it, I think you can try to find a way, and it's not always going to be easy. That's by no means to say that like it's just going to be roses and easy path, but you know, believe in yourself.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Thanks to Garrett for coming on the show and helping us launch this thing. If you like what you heard, we'd really appreciate your help in spreading the word. So tell a coworker about the CBJ podcast, tell a friend, tell that person that's sitting next to you there on the bouldering mats right now. That person right there, go tell them. There's a lot of other CBJ content out there too. There's an insider newsletter for the latest info about all the business of indoor climbing. And there's also a job board, so if you're moving and searching for a job at a climbing gym, check that out. You can also follow us on Instagram, which is @climbingjournal, or you can just click around on the main website. That's climbingbusinessjournal.com. We'll see you again soon for another episode.